Thank you so much for joining me today for my podcast episode, Season 3, Episode 4. The name of today's episode is Healing Ain't for the Weak, but it is necessary for growth. This episode is very near and dear to my heart. It's a lot to unpack today. I'm going to try to get through everything with as less tears as possible. I've learned to give myself grace in a way where if there are tears, they're just going to be tears. It's organic and it's real and it's what it is. Healing has been something that I've been focusing on lately for the last, 3 years. When the pandemic started, it's actually when my healing journey specifically began. And it's still continuing, but I am in a much more healed space now than where I was when I first started. And I have no one, should I say, to give the glory to but God, because it has not been easy, but it's definitely been worth it. And it took me a couple of weeks to fully gain all the information, the meat and potatoes that I felt would resonate with you all to be able to create this episode, which is why I paused for a few weeks, because every time that I come to you all in this season that I'm in my life, I want it to be intentional, I want it to be purposeful, and I want you to be able to learn and gain something from it. I noticed that the podcasts that I choose to listen to and I gain the most from are inspirational, motivational. They teach me something and they have a lot to unpack. Sometimes that will help me look within and see what things about myself can either be fine-tuned or I need to do more of. So today's episode is going to be one of those kind of episodes. I first just want to start off with giving you all a backstory on how I even began or even knew to start a healing journey from the very beginning. So when the pandemic first started, just to be very short, I am a person that I was a very extroverted person. I wanted to be around people. It was very integral to my happiness, I felt like at the time. And so the pandemic sitting me down put me in an unfamiliar territory that was very uncomfortable for me. And when I say uncomfortable, I mean, I felt like the walls were caving in. I used to cry every single day, like literally cry every single day, and just trying to figure out what God did this for. Why did this have to happen? Why did this pandemic had to come to us the way in which it did? It was so unexpected and it was so abrupt and it changed everything just like that. But I think that in looking back in retrospect, what I noticed and what I realized is sometimes the best time to grow is when it's not planned, when it's unexpected, when it is going to cause you to feel extremely uncomfortable. Because in uncomfort and discomfort is where healing can begin, right? And so when I started this healing journey and I was sat down, I had to face a lot. I had to face some internal things. I had to face the attachment style that I was operating in the space of, which in that time frame, I was an anxious, and I'll break down all the different attachment styles for you because a lot of this stems and piggybacks from one term to the next. So I'm going to explain some terms and educate you guys for those that don't already know what these things are. And I just had to really learn that where I was operating in the space of was not healthy for my growth. I had so many ambitions at the time that I wanted to unravel or unpack. But the day-to-day, always on the go, always ripping and running the streets, hanging out, never really making time to sit down, think, and process things was where I was at that time. And I wasn't able to hone in onto the things that would allow me to grow, right? And so when I really started to grow and started to attack a healing journey at the very minute level that it began, because trust me, it became progressive over time, I started praying. That's the first thing that I know to do. When I feel weary, when I feel frustrated, unsure, or uncertain, I pray. That's how I am. As you have known by now, that's what I do. And I started asking God why, and then I changed my conversation from why to what next. What does this look like for me? What can I do differently? And how can I become progressive in building and growing in this life ahead at this moment in time? And what I did was I started to study. I started to study the word, study my feelings and process them. So this was something that I never knew to do. When I felt things, I was taught to be strong. I was taught to ignore vulnerabilities, and I was taught to just proceed forward and navigate beyond that. And I had to learn how to become vulnerable, knowing that vulnerable didn't mean that I was weak, but it simply meant that I actually was strong. And I was trying to move to a more secure attachment style and noticing what my feelings meant accepting them for what they were in the moments that I felt them, but also finding a healthy way to move past them, asking God for guidance, and even just journaling in those moments when I started to feel these things and noticing that, okay, this is something that I need to take heed to. How did I feel when I felt this? What was I thinking? What can I do to become progressive beyond this feeling? And I started to really do the work. When you hear the word healing, oftentimes, it's seen as something is wrong with you detrimentally physically, or sometimes there's some type of mental imbalance. At any rate, healing can be whatever that looks like for whomever it is applicable to. But at any rate, it's not a bad thing. It's actually helpful, and it causes you to push yourself to a place where you feel comfortable, safe, and secure with self. That's another thing that I did. I learned to embrace self-care more. And when we hear the word self-care, the very surface level of self-care is getting your nails done, hair for men, getting haircuts, going out to the spa, getting massages, and all of those things are self-care. But as I stated, they're very surface level aspects of self-care. The self-care that I'm talking about was meditation. It was drawing inward and sitting in my thoughts and feelings. It was learning to cry in the moments that I felt the urge to cry, and then understanding that those tears allowed whatever I felt in my spirit at that time to flow freely and to move on from it. It was for me to learn to connect closer to God, because a lot of the things that we face in life, we don't realize that when we draw closer to God and seek Him for refuge, seek Him for guidance, seek Him for direction, that is where our growth lies. He wants us to seek Him out. He wants us to get closer to the words and works of Jesus and the thoughts and feelings of all of those that were in that time, before Christ and even after. And He wants us to understand that in looking and taking pieces of these stories of these people that preceded us, this is what can help us learn that the things that we're experiencing are very normal, and that there are avenues and ways to get past all of it, to grow through all of it. So that's what I started doing. Another thing that I did was I started to lean in on a healthy lifestyle. I went to a couple of vision board parties within the last few years, and I even had my own at that time. And what I learned most is what that saying says when it says write it down and make it plain. That is so integral to our growth as well. When we write down our thoughts and feelings, we can truly understand why and how we feel the way that we do. And then we can also create a roadmap or a blueprint on how we can build and grow in the process of a healing journey, right? So I started creating things that I wanted to aspire to become. I wrote down that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I wrote down that I wanted to start living a healthier lifestyle, meaning eating healthier foods, drinking more water, minding my business. I insert that to be facetious, but no, for real. For real. And I also understood that as long as I was intentional with these things and making this a consistent part of my growth, but also a part of my journey, that I would be able to allow these things to become second nature, right? Because it takes 21 to 30 days, argumentatively, to create a habit and become consistent in that habit, right? Good or bad. But we're focusing on the good in this instance. And so when I noticed that, I started to become consistent in these things over time, and I started shifting my mind and my focus and understanding that certain people, things, and avenues didn't necessarily align with where I was trying to get to, I had to make some changes. Now, what I'm going to do is be completely real and honest with you all. Once you start making those changes, you will be seen as a villain. I'm going to be real with you. Anytime that I talk to you on this podcast, it's always going to be from a very real place. That's the only thing I know how to be, is organic, real, and authentic. It's going to make you seem as the villain. It's going to make you seem that you're acting brand new, that you're acting funny, that you're being standoffish, and all of the things that you can think one would think once you start moving out of a norm into a new norm, which is a better norm for you, right? For your growth. And you have to, my loves, get comfortable accepting the rhetoric that people place on you once you start growing and peeling back layers of a different version of yourself. It doesn't mean that you even subscribe or are any of these things that you've been deemed or tagged as. But what it means is that you're so focused on growing, you're so focused on the journey ahead and what God has told you once you start that connection with Him, that you're going to hone in on that and focus less on what other people think. Because once you get truly comfortable and only focusing on what you feel, what God tells you, and what you think about yourself, that's where real true growth and healing is rooted. We can't be anything more than where we are until we see ourselves in a bit better light, right? So you are what you tell yourself. You are what you see yourself as. So you have to speak nice to yourself all the time, affirming yourself every day in the mirror, writing post-it notes if that's what works for you to see it visually. Believing and starting to walk in these things is what's going to essentially help you become the best version of yourself. Even when you're starting the journey, you'll see yourself growing throughout it. Trust and believe. I've been doing the work. I've done the work. I'm telling you, it's real. And it's almost like, I'm not even going to say almost, it is a spiritual awakening, because there's something that awakens within you where you start seeing yourself in such a light that you didn't even know you had the power to possess this. And once you start realizing that, that's when life starts to become easier. Nothing in life is going to be easy. It's always going to have toil, triumph, trials and tribulations, peaks and valleys. All of those things are going to be a part of the journey, because it's what continues to help you grow. But at the end of the day, once you get comfortable accepting that understanding, it makes life easier to live. The next thing that I wanted to focus on, which is going to pivot into the actual meat and potatoes of this discussion, is going to be defining some terms and breaking them down. It's going to take a while for us to get through this episode, but it's very meaningful, and trust and believe. Everyone is impacted by everything that I'm talking about right now. So please, if you never paid attention to anything that I discussed in any of the episodes or honed in on to certain parts, this episode is the most integral, and I swear by the end of it, you'll feel better about hearing these things. It might make you feel uncomfortable about some of the things you know about yourself, that you might identify with some of these terms and some of these attachment styles, but it will also trigger you to do better or to continue doing exactly what you're doing to continue growing on the journey that you're on. So the first term that I wanted to discuss, obviously, the topic of this discussion is healing. Healing is defined as the process of making or becoming sound or healthy again. So if we're looking in terms of a mental standpoint, when you have ways of being or a way of living life from what you were shown as a child, a lot of the times that's what you become. So, for example, if you were in a space or an environment that didn't show you how to communicate your thoughts and feelings, or how to navigate, moving past certain shortcomings in life, then you might identify with a more insecure attachment style, which I'm going to cover later in this conversation. If you were somebody that was engaged by your parents, spoken life into, told that you can do things, emphasized the ability and the understanding of confidence, shown that there's a way to be these things without having to hide or make yourself small, but to stand tall in exactly who you were and to be confident in that and not ever to people please, then you will identify a more secure attachment style. And if you are operating in the space of an insecure attachment style, what I want to explain to you is you have the ability to move beyond that. We are not always going to be stuck in a rut. We have to have intentionality to move beyond it, okay? So I want to disclaim that first before we really unpack these things, because like I said, a lot of these things can be very triggering. They were triggering to me because I felt a lot of these things, but I also learned that I can be intentional and grow through them with God and with intention on my own action. So the next thing I wanted to highlight is the term generational curses. Generational curses is a habit or behavior that has been passed from one generation to the next. So, for example, because we hear it so much, some may say it's cliche, some may say they don't describe to it. We're all entitled to our own opinion, but for this episode, I do believe in generational curses. And what I will say is, one generational curse that I know I was operating in the space of as it relates to parenting is, my mom is a great woman. She is. She's had her triumphs, trials and tribulations over life, over time that I was impacted by, and my sister, but we found ways to navigate later in life past it. But what you don't know, you don't know. And so my mom is someone that used to yell a lot. My mother is someone that believed in reprimanding by scolding a lot. My mother is someone that believed in constantly coming from an aggressive language style, which translated and trickled over to my style in parenting my children. But like I said, when I started this healing journey 3 years ago, I had to realize if I don't find a way to navigate in a more healthy way, how to be a parent to my children, I will create a generational curse. So now you see how I'm tying this into rhetoric. and making the same things that I learned and experienced as a child become a part of my children's learning capabilities and how they navigate life as humans and people, and just learning how they can possibly use what they saw, good, bad, or indifferent, as a way to interact with people when they get older that can create childhood traumas. Okay? That's where generational curses create childhood trauma. That's the next term that I want to highlight. Childhood trauma is any significantly distressing experience you may have been exposed to as a child. Some of the examples may include physical violence, sexual abuse, natural disasters, loss of a loved one, abandonment, foster care, or adoption. Any other event where you felt scared, helpless, horrified, or overwhelmed, and you were not engaged properly by your caregiver to learn how to navigate these feelings from these sorts of traumas. That's deep. I'm going to pause for a second so you can take in what I just said, because it's deep, okay? And I had to dig deep when I started realizing some of the childhood traumas that I'm about to tell you about. This is a very personal episode for me. It's the first time that I've out loud spoken this to a massive audience, but it's necessary because it's a part of my healing journey, being able to use my stories and my triumph as a part of an understanding to other people that they can cope and get through. You don't have to be victim to the things that you went through. You can be a victor. You can be a survivor. You can be someone that thrives beyond the things that you went through in life. I had to realize in that healing journey that a lot of my people pleasing, a lot of my ability to always feel like I had to make myself seem small around certain people, and even just the ability where I felt like I needed to navigate life being accepted and liked by everybody, came from childhood trauma. I did deal in a situation where I had a mother that was addicted to drugs. Not her whole entire life, but a good portion of her life, as I was around 7-ish and well into I became about 15-ish. And she went through a sobriety process where she was able to heal by using God. She went away to a ministry and she delved completely into the word. And that's what moved her from her addiction. But when people have addictions, we oftentimes or all the time are impacted by that no matter what. Whether it's good or bad. Some people become narcissistic because of the things that they go through, the traumas that they face. Some people decide to become empathic. But then with empathic, it does allow you to be spread thin in people pleasing, not having a true sense of self, always wanting to be accepted, and all of the things that I discussed. Another time that I had to deal with trauma was when I had an instance where I was beaten really bad by my father. It was very aggressive, I feel like, punishment for the reason why it happened at hand. And no man should ever hit their children in any way possible that will hurt them physically. But in this case, it hurt me mentally because this was something that I buried in my life for years and didn't understand or even think about what happened, why it happened, or anything like that. So when I started delving into those two instances of my personal life and understanding that these two things had everything to do with why I was the way that I was, it was an ugly reality, but it was a very necessary reality because that is when the true healing began. I had to realize that some of the interactions that I had in seeking validation from men was me trying to find a father figure that I didn't have in my father that kind of was in and out of my life throughout. It was never a consistent journey. And when I realized that that was the case, I had to start looking at men differently. But it was not easy. It was an uphill battle throughout this process in trying to learn a safe and secure way of dealing with men and understanding that some men are just not for me, while some are. And even when you navigate that space, it doesn't mean that even if you find attributes of somebody that does not align with you, that they're bad people. It simply means that they're not for you. When you start having a stronger and better, more sense of self and self-awareness, you realize that certain things and people just do not fit or align with your journey. And that's okay. But that's when you have to take action to move forward. Hence the reason why once I started becoming self-aware, I had to learn that this marriage wasn't for me anymore, which is the main reason why I decided to claim and file for a divorce. And I talked briefly about that in the first episode of this season. The very next thing that I want to also highlight is once I started realizing the attachment style that I was operating in the space of at that time, which was a bit anxious, I had to realize that trauma bonding is what created these unnecessary connections to people, whether it be man or woman. Now, what a trauma bond is, in definition, is a bond with other people through negative or toxic experience. So I've already explained generational curses to you, and I've already explained childhood trauma to you. So if you look at how those two things connect and piggyback off of each other, everything in this episode is a domino effect. So when you start looking at trauma bonding, it allows you to attach negatively and form negative connections to people that have like experiences to you. So you start realizing that you might hang around people that had shared experience where they might have faced childhood trauma in the way that you did with a drug addicted parent, or you might have people that were abused or raped, or you might have people that were adopted. Whatever their instance was in their life and their upbringing, you bond through trauma. But that's not healthy. What we have to understand is trauma bonding is what creates soul ties, twin flames, and things like that. I'll talk about that in another episode because that's a conversation for another day. But you create attachments, unhealthy attachments to people when you trauma bond to them because you don't have a safe, secure, or healthy way of navigating feelings, thoughts, and emotions because your caregivers didn't show you that adequately as a child. So you just become adults that are unhealed children. That's where childhood trauma stems, and that's where some of these unhealed adults navigate the space of. So then, if we look at attachment styles, the attachment styles I'm going to go through, I'm going to explain them and break them down. I'm going to give you examples of them, and I'm going to, by the end of this episode, you will have a clear sense of what you are and who you are. And you'll understand if you're any of the insecure attachment styles, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to begin a significant healing journey. And if you're operating in the space of a secure attachment style, keep going, keep doing it, keep being brave and standing in who you are confidently because you're amazing. Once you get to a secure attachment style, or if you already are operating in the space of that, that is what allows you to live life out loud, live life fully. Move in the fullness of purpose in who you are and identify who you are among everyone else. It sets you apart. It's important. So the secure attachment style is to secure an ability to build healthy, long-lasting relationships with other people. The ability to regulate your emotions. You have the ability to easily trust others. It's effective communication skills, ability to seek emotional support. Comfortable with being alone, which is a key and important one because a lot of people don't know how to do that. I struggled with that in the past. Comfortable in close relationships, the ability to self-reflect in partnerships, ability to manage conflict well, high self-esteem, and last but not least, the ability to emotionally be available for people. If you have any of those or all of those attributes, my loves, you operate in the space of a secure attachment style. The other attachment styles that operate in the space of insecurities are anxious avoidant, dismissive avoidant, and disorganized or fearful avoidant. And I'll break them down individually. The first one is, first what I want to highlight is why you would be operating in the space of these attachment styles in the first place. If your caregivers left you to fend for yourself at any given time, expected you to be independent at an age sooner than what you should be independent, reprimanded you for depending on them for time, care, love, and affection, rejected you when expressing your needs or emotions, been slow to respond to your basic needs or essentials, getting you something to eat, taking you somewhere, doing something that you actually needed to be done, like doctor's appointments, dentist appointments, going to school, all of those sorts of things, if they were neglected at any point of your life, is what would have placed you in the umbrellas of the attachment styles that I'm going to highlight in this conversation. The anxious avoidant attachment style is fears rejection, depending on a partner for validation or emotional regulation. They have very high codependent tendencies, which means they always need to be connected to people to feel comfortable or confident. If they don't have connections to people, then they can't figure things out on their own. That's what codependence looks like. And I did an episode about that last season talking about codependency, and I explained it all in its totality. So if you haven't heard it, go back to one of my older episodes in season 2. They also have very anxious ways of being, navigating anxiety. When you operate in the space of an anxious avoidant style, you cannot cultivate normal, healthy relationships with people because you're always anxious and thinking that someone or something is going to happen to you, or that someone is angry with you or feels a way toward you. And you have a hard time understanding why you always feel these feelings because you're anxious. And the avoidant piece of it is you're not tapping into why you're feeling this way, and you're moving away from trying to be better than that, trying to move outside of that way of operating in relationships with people in intimacy, whether it's a monogamous relationship or a friendship, whatever, or even a family ship, whatever space you operate in a relationship with someone, the anxious avoidant has a difficult time because they're so codependent and hypervigilant all the time. The next one is dismissive avoidant. A dismissive avoidant person avoids vulnerability, closeness, and intimate connections and attachments to other people. They have a history of short flings. So if we're looking in terms of relationships, because we do highlight that a lot on this podcast, it just simply means they have really quick relationships. So someone that is a dismissive avoidant tends to want to be in relationships for sex, and then they're out the door. Or they want to be in surface level interactions, and then once it gets deeper and penetrates feelings, they're out the door. So everything is just a quick fling, one and done, I'm done. Or even a couple, 2, 3, 4, and I'm done. I don't want any real attachment to anyone. They have affection blows of hot and cold, which means on one hand, it might seem like affectionately they're present with you, they're engaging with you, they're intimate, it seems, with you, and then they're completely cold, disengaged, and don't want any interaction at all. People that operate in a dismissive type of attachment style can be extremely hard to navigate space with. And I say this from a very personal place because I've done the legwork. Trust me. I've been in a significantly long relationship with a person that was like this. The next thing that they do is they nitpick the relationship. A dismissive person, because they are not in tune with their own feelings, they don't choose to be, they weren't shown how to be, they tend to nitpick everything about their partner. So even if they cultivate and start a relationship and it seems like it's going well, they'll start looking at the way the partner dresses. They'll start to look at the way the partner speaks. They'll start to look at the way the partner carries himself. And they'll start nitpicking the smallest minute details about their person to talk themselves out of it. Self-sabotage. Dismissive people do that very often. The next thing that they do is they have a low tolerance for conflict. So if you're trying to understand why certain people just do not like conflict and they'll avoid it at all costs, it's because they don't have the emotional capability or intelligence to be able to talk through conflict. They think all conflict is bad, and it's not something that they feel comfortable navigating because they don't know how to. They don't have the tools and resources to learn how to do this, my loves. So when you see someone operating in that space, they may have a dismissive attachment style. The next aspect of a dismissive attachment is strong sense of self. But that strong sense of self can be sometimes treading a thin line with narcissism. I'm not going to get into narcissism because I also discussed that in last season as well. But when you look at someone that has a strong sense of self, there are very surface level interactions with people, right? So when you look at the surface level interactions that they have with people, it's typically when you're out on vacation, when you're out hanging out at the bar, when you're out bowling, or whatever you're doing extracurricular, drinking, or whatever the case may be. That person seems like a fun time. They seem extremely confident. They seem like they have everything figured out, and they just come across with this presence that seems very self-assured, right? But it's a very surface level false sense of self. Sense of self in a secure person versus sense of self in a dismissive avoidant person is not the same. A dismissive person, sense of self is very false because when the curtains close, I like to say, and when the doors close and they have to look in the mirror at themselves, they can't face their true self because the true self is extremely insecure, unsure, unaware, very hypervigilant of trusting other people, and all on top of that, they have no ability to be self-aware because they don't truly know who they are internally. They've never been given the tools and resources from a caregiver to know how to be present with self and who they are as a person. So they become surface, and what you see is not what you get, but it is what you get in this case. In their personal life, when it's just them alone, what they see is not what they get because they feel down and out about who they are, but they don't have the ability to know how to navigate it. That doesn't mean that hope is lost when you're any of these insecure attachment styles. It simply means you have to dig deep and do the work to move past it. And I gave examples earlier, and I'll rephrase, paraphrase, or align with how that looks and what that looks like for you to be able to move past some of these insecure attachment styles if you identify with them. The next one is suppression of emotional experiences. So their childhood traumas, their interactions with their parents or caregivers or lack thereof, them being present for them, and even their experiences in different moments of their life, like milestones, they don't tap into those things. Anything that would evoke any type of real emotion, they dismiss that type of feeling and they don't even deal with it. That brings me to the minimizing romantic connections. They'll make it seem like their past partners, if their relationship didn't work out, didn't mean anything to them, wasn't a big deal. Oh, well, moving right along. But the bad thing about this is, and the unhealthy thing about the dismissive avoidant, when you don't tap into the things that you feel and how you felt in past relationships, and you just allow your relationships to end, whether the person leaves you or you leave them, you leave yourself in limbo and spread thin to the point of constantly, repetitiously taking this behavior into every interaction that you have with other people. Dismissive avoidants have hot and cold moments, like I highlighted a few minutes ago. So they have moments where they genuinely want to be connected to people, but they can't cultivate a real connection when they don't even allow themselves to feel emotional vulnerabilities. When you don't know or can't understand or identify an emotional vulnerability, it makes you have surface level interactions with people where someone that comes along that is secure will see that as a red flag and they'll go the other way. And then you miss out on possibly being in a relationship with someone that could be resourceful, helpful, or meaningful to your growth because you're not healed or in a healed place to know how to deal with that or even accept it, receive it, and navigate collectively. Every relationship is a collective effort, whether it's partnership, relationship, family ship, or whatever ship it is. You have to be in a healed place to be able to know how to do that. And some people just struggle with that as a thing. The next and last attachment style that I'm going to highlight in this episode is disorganized or fearful avoidant. Researchers argumentatively will call it disorganized or fearful. At any rate, it's the same. It's having extreme, inconsistent behavior and difficulty trusting others, fear of rejection, the inability to regulate emotions, contradictory behaviors, high levels of anxiety similar to the anxious avoidant. It is difficulty, or signs of both avoidant and anxious attachment styles are within this disorganized, fearful person. The unfortunate part about that type of attachment style is when someone is disorganized or fearful, they always seem like they're all over the place. They really can't tap into one feeling or emotion from the next, so everything just kind of blends together, which is why it's a combination of the other two. And in cultivating sound connections and relationships with people, they are always in the back of their minds fearful that someone will not be honest with them or be forward or forthcoming with them, not allow them to be themselves because they don't truly identify with who they are in self-wise anyway. And it just makes their relationships with people highly prone to conflict. All of these insecure attachment styles will, because when you're a secure person or partially secure, but you might have a little bit of anxiousness or a little bit dismissiveness within you, then you tend to be on two different roadways when you're interacting with people that have insecure attachment styles. And that creates high conflict because you're always going to feel like you're at odds. You're always going to feel like you never see eye to eye. You're always going to feel like you're just misunderstood. And it's always going to place you in a place of confusion. And that's why when we look at relationships overall or in general and try to understand why so many of our relationships don't work out, it's because one or all of these attachment styles have been something that we've either faced with other people or that we are within ourselves. And once we tap into the generational curses, childhood trauma, what trauma bonding looks like, and actually go back to the very first topic and the very first term that I defined, which is healing, at that moment, we can begin to live life in the way that it should be lived, which is intentionality, which is purpose, which is forward movement, growth, an abundance mindset, changing the way we see and think about ourselves, and even just becoming in a more healed place where we can be secure and cultivate meaningful relationships that will help us grow and that will mirror where we are in our journey. Healing makes us incompatible with people, but it allows us to lean more into a secure attachment style and strengthen our connection with self. And it allows us to gain a spiritual connection with a higher power, or in my case, God. And the reason why that was very important to highlight is because once you start doing the work, doing the true work of healing, and doing some of the things that I highlighted in the beginning that I did when I recognized that there was some healing that needed to be done, you'll start realizing how you feel. You'll start being more present for self. You'll start understanding that it's okay for you to feel that boundaries are necessary in the place that you are, because you have to make sure that your mental peace and your mental capacity is in tune for your specific growth. I was looking on TikTok a while ago and I saw this gentleman and he posted this really dope post. I thought it was so dope coming from a man. And he basically said that once he started his healing journey, he started realizing going out to the club was no longer attractive to him. His person or his woman wasn't going to be found in someone's section. Not saying that doing these things makes you all bad, but over consuming these things will make you distracted and not allow you to truly and fully grow. He said that he started realizing that not responding to text messages or phone calls sometimes from certain people, or even just in certain moments of you trying to align when you wake up in the morning or trying to get through things in a day, that is important for you to sometimes ignore in that moment to align your mental capacity and set your mood, set your tone, set your chakras for the day. It's okay not to always be available for everybody, because sometimes you have to be present for self. When you're absent from your own self or absent from your mind and body, you're just a shell at that point. When we navigate life, we're navigating life with a spirit within us. You choose what spirit you want to operate and dwell in. Do you want it to be a godly, intentional, holistic, true, safe and sound and secure spirit? Or do you want it to be a negative, toxic spirit that continues to perpetuate generational curses, that continues to perpetuate toxic behavior, that will move into the space of narcissism if you don't tap into it early on, or that is just undesirable to be around from other secure people? You have to understand and take notice and take awareness to where you fall in these attachment styles. And then, my loves, you have to start doing the work. What I noticed in this healing journey is that it is uncomfortable, yes. It requires constant work and discipline. It takes time. It takes a lot of time, and it never ends. It's a constant process throughout life. You just become a more healed version of yourself, but it never stops, because any given time, triggers will come up. But how you navigate and heal through the triggers and move through the triggers is what's going to define what attachment style you've moved into, whether you're still operating in an insecure or are you moving to a more secure. You have to be patient with yourself and give yourself grace, okay? Because like I said, there will be moments where you may feel extremely vulnerable and spread thin. You may feel triggered by something that someone says because you still have work to do. You may feel like the places that God is placing you in life are uncomfortable, but you have to peel back the layers and allow yourself, like I said earlier, to feel these feelings so that whatever it is that you feel, you can grow through it, my loves. It can be done, but you have to give the intention. So many people stay stagnant in insecure attachment styles because the work of healing is a lot. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not for the weak. You have to pray to God to keep you armored, keep you strong, keep you moving forward, even in moments where you don't want to. People ask me a lot, oftentimes, how is it that I appear so strong all the time? But I'm going to be honest with you. I am not always strong. I do still have my moments of weakness. But what I've became intentional with is not dwelling in the space of weakness or self-doubt or imposter syndrome or any of those things. When I feel these feelings and thoughts, I pray to God, I turn to the word, and I readjust and shift my mind and focus so that whatever I felt in the moment that I felt something uneasy or uncomfortable, I'm now in a better place. It takes constant work, my loves, and it never stops. But you have to decide and determine that you love you. You want for you to grow. You can move beyond generational curse. I consider myself a chain breaker. What a chain breaker is that generational curse or that chain that you have to these negative past interactions in childhood and even in some adulthood experiences. You can break the chain of a generational curse and become something greater. It's not to knock your parents. It's not to chastise them or even criticize or judge them, because they still have a level of healing that they may have not gone through, which caused them to create that dynamic with you. It's not for us to frown upon or judge our parents. I love my parents to death because I do honor my parents, and I believe that my days will grow longer because of it. I don't judge them for their shortcomings. I accept and acknowledge it, and I move on from it because I know that I'm creating a different dynamic for myself and for my children. And when you become that intentional with living life out loud, which is what I mean by fact, living life out loud and doing these things, doing the work, sacrificing the time. Sometimes you can't go out. Sometimes you can't be present for the social engagements and gatherings. Sometimes you're not going to be mentally connected to certain people, but that's okay. That is what your healing journey is here for. It's here to elevate you. Elevation in life means anything that's lower than where you're elevating to has to get left there. It doesn't mean that you are not, or that you somehow think you're better than people, or that you think that you're more sound than anyone. It simply means that you're no longer navigating in that space and you're moving forward. Forward movement is what's important. Forward movement is going to help you grow. Forward movement is going to help you have a better identity of self. And it's what's going to allow you to be self-aware. My loves, if you can just give yourself the time, bet on yourself, pour back into yourself. Ask God for guidance on how you can navigate and drawing inward and growing closer to self, and understanding that with God, all things are possible as He is the source provider of our strength. You will be progressive in this life. You will reach heights that are unimaginable. You will be a chain breaker. You will have a secure attachment style. You will be able to cultivate healthy and sound relationships with people. But the first one that you have to get together and align, my loves, is the one with yourself. If you take nothing else from this message, my loves, understand that as long as you're always intentional with yourself, putting yourself and your needs first, going to God for guidance, doing the work consistently, and pouring back into the things that will help you be aligned, you will be able to live a fruitful life. And you won't be able to think of anything in your past as just merely existing. You'll begin to live. And you'll be able to live it on your terms, unapologetically. And it'll feel good, and it'll leave a legacy behind that people will remember you by. You have to do the work, my loves. You are worth it. You are enough. You can become something great. You just have to first believe it and then go do it. Till next time, my loves, this was an amazing conversation. It was one well thought out, well planned. I thank God for everything. I thank God for you all for pouring into me by listening, for coming to me in the episodes that you've been faithful enough in coming to. And I will continue to come to you and pour into your spirit so that you can become the best version of yourself. Until next time, loves, I'll talk to you soon. I'm out.